Number 14, we have this given statement and this one, so I'm just going to write those down. ST is parallel to WV, and ST is congruent to VW. So that's congruent to that. So we have one pair of sides congruent. Now, let's see what the parallel lines gives us, right? So we got that line parallel to that one. And we have this transversal right there. So, I can see that we can say this angle is congruent to this one because alternate angles are congruent, and that would be angle STU is congruent to angle WVU. STU congruent to WVU. Alternate angles are congruent. Now we got SUT is congruent to WV, which are these angles right here. SUT is congruent to WUV. And those angles are vertical angles. So vertical angles are congruent. And let's mark these down. These are a pair of angles congruent, and these are a pair of angles congruent. Now it looks like we got angle, side, which means we have our triangle congruency theorem. So we got triangle STU is congruent to triangle WVU by angle, side. And then finally, to prove that these should be segments. So to prove that SU is congruent to WU, well, we have triangles congruent to one another, so SU is congruent to WU by CPCTC. Okay, 15. Well, they gave us 3 given statements, so I'm just going to write all of those down. The last one they did not write was AC is congruent to CE. This one should be obvious to you guys, but we got those congruent to each other. We got these segments congruent to each other. Again, these are all your given statements, right? Nice. So I see that we have side, congruency. So triangle, I'll do ACB. Triangle ACB is congruent to triangle CED. And that is going to be by side. And then to finally prove this, angle A is congruent to angle DCE. That's going to be CPCTC because we have triangle congruency already. Okay. All right, so here's our 2-column proofs. Now, I know some of you guys feel a little shaky about this, but right, just go one step at a time. So let's make our table. Statements, and reasons. So just to give you guys some practice, right? So let's write all our given stuff first. So GH congruent to JK, given. So right, that's this one, GH congruent to JK. HI is congruent to KL, given. Even though they marked it, again, just getting you guys in a habit to just mark it yourself as well. Number 3, IG is congruent to LJ. That's our third given. So IG is congruent to JL. So I see that we have side, 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 which means we can write triangle GHJ is congruent, oh, not J, triangle GHI. GHI is congruent to triangle JKL. JKL. Side, side, side. And then finally, we can prove that those angles are congruent to each other. Angle I congruent to angle L by CPCTC. Again, you guys just keep on practicing, and if you guys just keep on practicing this, then a lot of this stuff becomes easier to see. All right, let's look at this one. Statements and reasons. Okay, so let's just write our given. Angle N is congruent to angle P. That's given, so writing it down. Number 2, angle M is congruent to angle Q. That's also given, writing it down. And lastly, they tell us MO is congruent to QR. Given. And writing it down. I see that we got angle, angle, side, angle, angle, side. So triangle NMO is congruent to triangle, right? NMO is congruent to triangle PQR. Remember, the order matters when you guys say which triangle is congruent to what. So that is going to be angle, angle, side. And lastly, we can say angle O is congruent to angle R because of CPCTC. Okay. 18. Statements. Reasons. Okay, so statement, right? I'm just gonna write all of our given stuff, you guys. Angle U congruent to angle V, that's this one and that one. Number 2, angle T is congruent to angle W, that's given as well. So angle T, that angle is congruent to this angle. 3, TU is congruent to VW. That's also given, and these are these angles. So as you guys can see, if you just write down all your given, then it kind of tells you, it kind of shows you a map of like how to prove that these triangles are congruent. So you got angle, side, angle, angle, side, angle. So 4. So I'm gonna go from U to T to S. So triangle UTS is congruent to triangle. Now angle U had that one arc, so on the other triangle it's angle V. So angle V to angle W to angle X. So triangle VWX. And that is done by angle, side, angle. Angle, side, angle. And now we can prove all corresponding parts of the triangle congruent, which is this one. So angle S is congruent to angle X because of CPCTC. Again, we can say CPCTC right after we prove triangles are congruent to each other. Okay, this one. One is AC congruent to EF. That's given. Write down. And 2, AB is congruent to ED. That's also given. And mark it down. Okay, take a notice, guys, right? We got right triangles, which means we just think about our right triangle congruency theorems, and these pair of sides, I'll do a different color. These pair of sides are your legs, which was this one. And these pair of sides are your hypotenuses, which is this one. So that should hint you guys that triangle CAB is congruent to triangle FED. And that's going to be by our hypotenuse leg congruency theorem. Now we prove those are congruent. Now we can prove that all our corresponding parts are congruent. So BC is congruent to FD by CPCTC. Okay. Number 20. Okay, so we got statements and reasons again. Why? Oh man, it's... Anyway, statements, reasons. Okay, 1, we got GH is congruent to JI. GH is congruent to JI. That's given. Number 2, we got angle GHJ is congruent to angle IJH, which is given. Now, we wrote down all our givens, so let's see if we can write anything else. Well, we can write HJ is congruent to HJ by reflexive property. That's congruent to that, and looks like we got side angle side. So, oops. So, triangle GHJ is congruent to triangle IJH. And Y, we got side angle side. And then we can prove corresponding parts are congruent to each other. So GJ is congruent to HI by CPCTC. Okay, 21. MN congruent to NO, and MP is congruent to OP. So let's just write that down. MN congruent to NO, given, and MP is congruent to OP. So we wrote our given statements, so let's see if we can figure out anything else. Well, I see that NP is congruent to itself, so NP is congruent to NP. Reflexive property. 4. Now we got side, side, side for both triangles. So triangle PMN is congruent to triangle. PMN is congruent to triangle PON. Y, side, 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 and then proving triangle is congruent, or corresponding parts congruent to each other. So angle O is congruent to angle M because of CPCTC. Okay, so for this one, statements and reasons. 1, TU congruent to WU, reason is given. 2, angle T is congruent to angle W, that's also given. So we have these markings. Now we can say also this, right? Angle TUS is congruent to angle WUV because our vertical angles are congruent. And now if you look at both triangles, we have angle side angle. So triangle TUS is congruent to triangle WUV by angle side angle. And then 5, TS is congruent to WV because of CPCTC. 23, it's nice that they write all of our tick marks, but you guys are definitely going to have to do this for yourself on quizzes and for tests. So statements and reasons. AB is congruent to DE, that's given, and angle B is congruent to angle E, and that's also given. Now we can also say that these are congruent because vertical angles are congruent. So angle BCA is congruent to angle ECD. Vertical angles are congruent. Now we have the triangles are congruent. So triangle BCA is congruent to triangle ECD by angle side. And lastly, AC is congruent to DC because of CPCTC. All right, so this one right here. So write down our given. HG is parallel to JI, given. GI is congruent to IK. That is also given. And angle HIG is congruent to angle JKL, given. Okay, so they did the markings for us. Now let's see what we got from here. Well, we already see this one and this one. They marked that down for us. Now we need to use information from knowing that those two are parallel. Well, parallel lines. This is parallel to this one. So that means this one is the transversal. So parallel lines cut by transversal, that means this angle is congruent to this one by corresponding angle. So angle HGI is congruent to angle JIK. Corresponding angles are congruent. So now we got angle side angle, so triangle HGI is congruent to triangle JIK by angle side angle, and then we could prove this is a typo. There is no C and there is no F, so that really should be angle H congruent to angle J. That's a typo. So angle H should be congruent to angle J because of CPCTC, because we proved that the triangles are congruent to each other. Okay. 25. MN congruent to PO. Number 1, that's given. Number 2, our other given statement, MP is congruent to NO. That's our other given. We used up our given, so let's see what else we could find. Well, we got that. NP is congruent to NP. That's given. So then we can say the triangles are congruent to each other. Triangle MNP is congruent to triangle MNP is congruent to triangle OPN. OPN. Again, the order matters, okay, guys? And that's because of side, side, side. And now we can prove that that's congruent. Angle M is congruent to angle O because of CPCTC. Okay. Lastly, we got TS is perpendicular to VW. That is given. 2, we got TU is congruent to WU. That's also given. So since we have so we already noted that this line's congruent to that one. That's good. And now we have these parallel lines. So with the parallel lines, we can say that this angle is congruent to this one because that's two parallel lines cut by a transversal. So that is going to be angle STU is congruent to angle VWU by alternate interior angles are congruent. And then lastly, we can say this one's congruent to this one because they're vertical angles. So angle SUT is congruent to angle VUW. Vertical angles are congruent. And number 5, CPCTC, because we can say all the corresponding parts are congruent to each other now. And our last one, AB is parallel to DE. That's given. Angle CBD is congruent to angle ADB. That's also given. They marked it down for us, so let's see what we can use from knowing that it's parallel. Well, we know these two lines are parallel, so that means this angle is congruent to this one by alternate interior angles congruent. So angle ABD is congruent to angle CDB. Alternate interior angles are congruent. And we can say that that line is congruent to itself. So BD is congruent to BD because of reflexive property. And to compare the triangles congruent to each other, we got angle, side, angle. So triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CDB. Angle, side, angle. And lastly, we can say BC is congruent to AD. Because of CPCTC. Hopefully this, guys, helps you, and right, the more you guys practice this stuff, I think slowly but surely it just starts to get a little bit better and faster at it, okay? See you guys on Tuesday. Good luck.